Warning: some of these stories may contain material not suitable for all, including domestic violence. Listener discretion is highly advised. My ex bludgeoned me with a wooden bat, attempted to relieve me of my life by gnawing a path through the arteries in my forearm, before attempting to have me incarcerated for sexual assault and battery. She beat me with a bat, tried to slit my freaking wrist with her teeth, and then tried to accuse me of rape. I won't claim she was insane. I'm not a doctor. And I can't claim that I wasn't partly to blame. I was. But the whole shtick about who did what is a story for another day. On this particular day, she came home and attempted to seduce me. The only problem was, I was in the process of moving out, because, breakup, when she realized I wasn't going to put out, she lost her flippin' mind. She went downstairs and retrieved a huge wooden bat. Not one of those tiny sissy sticks, but a huge I'm trying to hit a home run with your skull bat. She came back upstairs and took the bat to my stuff. I stood there in shock as she utterly demolished my TV, my PS3, and finally my laptop. At this point, she realized that destroying my stuff wasn't going to get a rise out of me, so she turned the bat on me. She got 3 or 4 good hits in before I managed to disarm and push her halfway across the room. She then proceeded to throw insults at me, which I cannot repeat here, but were basically designed to provoke me to attack her. Her verbal diarrhea was what was giving me the sneaking suspicion that I was being set up. After 5 minutes of insult, she realized I wasn't going to do anything. So she attacked me again with her bare hands. At this point, I'd like to point out she is not that big. While she had a bat, she was able to do some major damage, but with only her hands. It's like being attacked by an angry kitten. While the blows themselves weren't painful, her nails were beginning to draw blood. I restrained her, and as gently as I could, with her kicking and screaming, carried her outside the room, tossed her into the hallway, then closed and locked the door behind me. She went downstairs, came back, and broke one of my favorite knives whilst trying to carve open the door. I called the police, who arrived 15 minutes later. All the while, she was banging on the door, daring me to come out so she can kill me. With the cops outside the house and her yelling at them to go away at the front door, I made a run for the back door. She saw me and intercepted me, attempting to stop me from opening the door. But then again, she's not that big. I restrained her with one hand. That was a mistake. As I was trying to open the door, she twisted over and sunk her teeth into my left wrist and began to grind her fangs, attempting to claim her pound of flesh. Great Scott, that was painful. I finally managed to open the door. The cops came rushing in and had to pull her off my wrist like she was some rabid Rottweiler. She finally calmed down, and I was able to grab my stuff, sans my good knife, and leave with the cops watching to make sure nothing else happened. I declined to press charges because, again, I wasn't entirely innocent in the run-up to this event. I found out a few days later that she had told people that I had raped her and beaten her. Her plan had been to get laid, provoke me into laying hands on her, and then get me locked up. Fun times. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the elite members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all for your continued support. I can't show my gratitude enough. For the latest news on the channel, please keep your eye on the community tab. Without further ado, it is time to sit back, relax, kick back, grab your snacks or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled Psycho X Stories. You should have noticed there was an ad right after the first story. There's going to be an ad after this introduction, and after that there will be no more ads within this video. Continuing on with the stories, shall we? I worked at a Halloween store. It was only temporary employment, as of course it was seasonal, but it did allow me to branch into other places of employment, such as working for Sears. But I digress. I only want to focus on the time I worked at the Halloween store. Just for a quick background on me, I used to be the type of girl who refused to go out to public places. Forget the panic attacks. I found it downright impossible to have a basic conversation with strangers. That's why, when my aunt pushed me to get this job, I was pretty hesitant. You see, my aunt was actually the manager, which ended up being a good thing for me, and she helped me get used to working. I'll tell you, she snapped me right into place right away, because after less than a month, you couldn't get me to stop talking. It's like a switch flipped in my brain, from introvert to extrovert. Seriously, I recommend anyone who might be the shy type to give working a shot. You'd be surprised how just doing something can get you out of your tough time. Anyway, after a month, we ended up hiring a new guy, who we're going to call Maxwell in the story. He was the typical skater dude, tall and skinny, with a long brown hair. He also had a love for, you guessed it, skateboarding. We hit it off pretty well, talking about our favorite movies as well as the video games we enjoyed playing. It turned out we were both Gears of War fans, and soon we added each other on Xbox, playing every single night of work. A few weeks before the Halloween store was going to close for the season, he ended up asking me out on a date. At the end of that night, he asked if I would be his girlfriend. I was crying because it was the first time in my life I've ever been asked out by anyone. Here I was, this shy and skinny, nerdy girl, actually being noticed for once in my life. Of course, I ended up saying yes, and we spent the next few months doing typical boyfriend and girlfriend activities. He even introduced me to skateboarding. However, after a year, I decided to end the relationship due to his constant partying and heavy drinking. There were plenty of times we would meet up, only for him to either be completely wasted or high off his rocker. Trust me, I tried to give him a chance, as they say, him living his young college years, but I wasn't all about that sort of life. Also, it had gotten bad since he started to hang out with a biker gang who constantly went out to bars. But the breaking point was when I found out he cheated on me with my best friend. The sad part was that they weren't even sneaky about it. She ended up gloating it in my face and talking about how easy I was to manipulate, which really brought back my anxiety and fears. To think I was doing so well. I'd started the job at Sears and had already moved my way up to an assistant manager. The next few months were a downward spiral for me as my friends and family did all they could do to see me happy. It was about 5 months after the breakup when I met someone else, who I'm actually married to at the moment. He's in the Marines and he's the sweetest man I've ever come to know. Not only was he very trusting of me, but he would support me even when I was having a bad day, something that Maxwell had done nothing of. It was always about him. So, at this point, you might be wondering, did anything else happen between you and Maxwell? Well, I'm glad you asked because it did. You see, after I started my new relationship, naturally, I started to post some photographs on Instagram to show my friends I was once happy again. They were all very supportive of me, and I appreciated all their well wishes. However, in between those positive vibes, I ended up getting a notification from a username I did not recognize. It turned out that it was Maxwell, which at the time we were dating, he hadn't used Instagram. The messages were of him asking for my forgiveness and wanting to know if I would give him another chance. I told him I was already in another relationship and I wasn't wanting to deal with a cheater. Once I told him that, he admitted to his mistakes before then blaming it all on me. Go figure. I proceeded to block him right then and there, hoping that this nonsense would cease for good. The conversation then extended to my cell phone, which, I should note, I had changed my number. I blocked him there shortly after the messages were sent, and then things went quiet for about 2 weeks. Fast forward to the evening of my little sister's birthday party. I had just clocked out of work and I was heading to the parking lot. As I got closer to my vehicle, I noticed someone standing right next to it. I was shocked to see that it was Maxwell. "There you are, honey. I've been waiting for you this entire time. Won't you come back to my place?" he said. I told him, "Maxwell, no. I already told you. It's too late for that now. Can you please just leave me alone?" He wasn't having it. I stood my ground, however, clenching onto the pepper spray I kept in my purse. "Well, if you won't go with me willingly, then I'll just take you by force," Maxwell said, before pulling out a pocket knife and starting to approach me. I had no choice but to use the pepper spray, as he was within just a few inches of my face. Naturally, he screamed as I quickly ran to my door, hopped in, then called my manager, who was still inside the building. He came out in less than 30 seconds later with one of the security guards, who managed to subdue Maxwell. Maxwell, however, got out of his grasp and then ran to some nearby apartment. All of this, mind you, after being pepper sprayed. Seriously, determination. Funny enough, there were a couple of police officers responding to a nearby disturbance, so we were able to notify them of what had taken place and got their attention. They took all of our statements as EMTs were helping Maxwell with his eyes. That was the last time I ever heard from Maxwell, in which I say, good riddance. Okay, even though I knew I wasn't in love with him, all I wanted to do was get a job to support his child that I had just given birth to. He had a good job up until 3 months of me having our daughter. I begged and pleaded with him to get a job, and this went on for over a year. During this time, he became increasingly violent with me and ended up being knockout dragouts, because a woman is only going to keep the upper hand for a very short time, and I'm a big bone girl who has fought chicks my whole life until getting pregnant, and all my wildness ended. He told me he would get a job if I moved 3 countries over away from my family. I flat out refused to move away from my family, especially while he was getting so violent with me around Casey. He had been cheating on me with several different girls, but that is beside the point. The straw that broke the camel's back was when he bit my ear from the back seat of my car while I was driving, with our child sleeping in her car seat. So I pulled over and then he rushed out, before I could even think, and dragged me out of the car. We were at someone he know's house, behind this shed so nobody could see, and he nearly bit my breast off as well. There were bite marks and it turned all different colors. I had just lied to my aunt I live with and other family members who live close by to her and told them I'd fallen out of the bathtub when me and him had spent the weekend together not long before that. Except he takes it one step further, and after he got me down and did all of that, he takes off for my car where the baby is and takes off while I'm running as hard as I can after him. He laughs and takes my cell phone and throws it into a cow field next door to where we were. I watched to see exactly where it went. I climbed the gate to the field, not taking my eyes off where he threw it. I couldn't believe it, but I actually found it rather quick and held it up and was screaming for him to get back or I would call 911. I had full custody and he knew it, but he still knew I did not like to involve the law into anything like that. I've just seen things backfire on some people I know who were in the right, and it all comes down to who they believe. I just wanted my baby back, and I would have called had he not come back. If this doesn't beat anything I've ever seen. He acted like nothing at all happened. I drove straight to my aunt's and uncle's house. They didn't live far at all from where we were at the time. As soon as we got there, he arrogantly gets out of the car, goes inside their house, and makes himself a heaping plate of my aunt's food. I immediately told my aunt to come with me, and me, her, and my daughter went to the back of the house when I told her everything and showed her what he'd just done to my ear and my breast. I told her I was done with him, and I couldn't take the chance on the baby getting hurt. I'd already taken too much of a chance as it was. After that, he literally stalked me so bad I couldn't take my daughter anywhere with me because he always chased me, and if I pulled over or he ran me off the road, he would go straight for my phone for some reason and would take it. I lost several phones during this time. Then, I wouldn't have my phone on me after that, so he couldn't get to it, and that seemed to make him more crazy. Then, she got sick, and he wanted to meet us at the doctor office, and I wasn't going to tell him he couldn't have anything to do with his daughter, and my aunt was coming too, so he would usually behave himself around her. He went through the diaper bag and everything I had brought, till he found my phone and stole it. I called and asked the doctor's office if he was going through my belongings out there while we were in the back with the baby. We had to have the doctor on call to come in that day, and we're the only ones there. From there on, I noticed signs all over the doctor's office where we went back that said the premises were electrically recorded. He tried to say that we had taken her in his car, and he found it under his back seat a few weeks later when he was trying to get me to unlock the phone so he could use it. I even told him I'd unlocked it one time, and he called and tried to get it hooked up because he was so mad. Oh yeah, he'd go all around the county and make a big circle and drive by all of my friends' houses where he thought I may be too. I figured that out when every single one of his friends would tell me every time I talked to them that they'd seen him drive by. Every time I talked to them, they would say they'd seen him drive by their house. Some of them I talked to every day. I didn't think it would ever stop. He eventually got into some trouble with the law and went to jail and had to go to drug court. He passed all of that, and he's now back in rehab 3 years later. Our daughter will be 9 in June, and he didn't call her until he started rehab like 3 weeks ago. For 3 years, he never called or came by to see her. He told her one day that he may be coming to see her the next weekend, but he wasn't sure. He said he'd call her the next day to let her know for sure. She didn't hear from him again, till I think they make them call from rehab. I would be happy if he would at least do right by her. If not, I'd just as soon him stay away from her and all of us. I don't talk down about him to our daughter, and I never have. I feel like she would hold that against me in the long run. She's a smart girl and she can figure things out on her own. I just wish he wouldn't hurt her like he has by what he's done. I'm just thankful that we both survived all of the craziness. Most thankful that my daughter survived it. I used to lay awake thinking about what could have happened. I met this guy when I was 22. He was in his early 30s and he was sarcastic, and I thought he was so smart and educated. After several months of catching up and fooling around, he, one night, gave me some ecstasy tablets, and while high, I said I loved him. You know, because when you're high, you love everyone. He got me to say it again the next day after I came down, and that's where his behavior changed. Soon after we started dating. Multiple messages and phone calls daily. I couldn't get a moment's peace. A couple of months later, we separated, but on good terms, to the point that I got into a bind and he let me move into his house. Well, This place was a massive trash pile, and as I wasn't working at the time, I took it upon myself to clean it. Was finding used syringes and used condoms all over the place. Yeah, much fun. I ended up getting a job and made friends with my coworkers, all straight guys. Naturally, working in hospitality led us to go for drinks quite a lot, which led to me being questioned on a regular basis. Are you sure they're straight? You seem to be spending a lot of time with them. Came to a head one night where I flipped and decided to leave while I was on the back balcony. The only way out of there is through the door and out through the front of the house, which is where he stood, blocking my path. I spent about several minutes asking him to get out of the way so I could leave, and he refused. So I ended up rushing him and pinning him against the wall, telling him in no uncertain words that I said I was leaving, never to block my way, etc., before I let him go and left. After a couple of weeks, he contacted me again, asked me to meet up for coffee, and mentioned that the rent I had been paying him, he had kept it all aside for me to move back south, as he knew that I was neither happy there nor any good with saving money. He wanted to meet for coffee and give me the money so I could leave the state, which was cool. Several months later, after moving around a bit and changing my phone number, which he managed to get a hold of every single time, there was a knock at the door of the house I was living in at the time. This guy had driven well over 1,000 kilometers after overhearing the name of my street during a phone call and basically knocked every door on the street to find me. He ended up waiting outside of my work that night and convinced me to stay in a twin motel room with him. Not long after, I relocated and changed my number yet again. He got my number yet again. I got a job and moved once more. He found me yet again. But this is where it got worse. About 2 years after, I had left the state that he lived in. He and a friend were beaten at some lookout park or something, 1,800 kilometers away from where I was living and working, and somehow he came to the conclusion that I had set it up. From that point forward, he orchestrated my job loss, had fake warrants released for me in his state. By this point, he was sleeping with a police officer. Man was continually sending abusive messages, which stopped after I agreed to accept a restraining order. After the magistrate of this hearing demanded to know why I had been locked in a cell even though there had been no charges made against me. The warrants were brought up, to which the magistrate replied, "Why are there warrants without charges being laid?" That gave me 2 years of peace. But as soon as the order ran out, he started abusing me again, ridiculing me, telling me how everyone hates me and I should just kill myself. So I took a restraining order out on him. Again, I was blessed with 2 years of peace. And again, he started as soon as it ran out. So I took another order. Same process, the abuse started after the 2 years were up. This time, however, the magistrate paid more attention. He was astounded by how long this had gone on, by how long I had been dealing with photos of me, along with my details spread around with lies and abuse, how I had actually been beaten up thanks to one of his friends arranging it. Again, I was interstate, to the point that the magistrate, word for word, asked me, "How the fuck are you still sane?" This magistrate saved my life. He listened to me. He made the order so that the guy had to remove every article he had ever posted about me from social media, and he made the restraining order permanent. After 8 long years, I was finally free. Sadly, as a result of those 8 years, I now have extreme social anxiety and honestly have no idea how to make new friends. So yeah, cheers for that. She wasn't my girlfriend, but she was my roommate in New York City. She said she was a lesbian, and the rule is you can't hook up with roommates. So I thought I was fine. Then, one night, I hooked up with her and her girlfriend, and after this, a screw went loose in her mind. She wanted to hang out all the time, and for me to go with her when she went out. But I had my friends too, and didn't want to go hang out with a group of lesbians all the time. That seems lame. In addition to not going out with her all the time, she started pounding on my door to hook up when I was at the apartment. But I wasn't really interested, and it drove her crazy. Well, one day I was on the roof deck of our apartment complex chilling with my neighbor, and all of a sudden cops bust through the door and asked for me by name. They cuffed me on the spot, and I had no idea why at the time. Later, I found out that my roommate called 911 and stated that I was harassing her and calling her 5 times a day for 2 weeks. Phone records would later show I called her 0 times in 2 weeks. When I was arrested, I only had my ID and $10 on me. They didn't let me grab my wallet, so after about 30 hours in jail and going in front of a judge, I was released, and it was 4 a.m., and I was homeless. The judge said I was restricted from going back to my apartment. I was completely fucked. Really fucked. I was starving, as all they gave us were cheese sandwiches and milk. But I asked for other people's milk, as I was hungry. I didn't know a lot of people's addresses off the top of my head, but I knew one friend on 55th Street and decided to make the trek up there. I decided to walk over using the subway. I spent $2 on an orange on the way and had $8 left. It was about 5:30 a.m. I got to 55th Street. I'm hungry and tired and feel completely fucked. He has to be there. I hope the buzzer wakes him up. I say a quick prayer and then buzz his apartment. He answers, yes. He lets me upstairs and I tell him the whole story. He said, bruh, I know exactly what you need. A fat joint. So we sparked one up and contemplated life, and it was one of the greatest moments of my life, escaping being homeless. He let me stay there in his tiny-ass studio until I got a new place. And after that, I started dating this girl in the South, so I moved back down to be with her. But this stupid case in New York City was still going, so I had to fly back to New York City once a month for 6 months, until prosecution accepted the evidence. Every month I flew back there and sit in the courtroom, and they would say prosecution has not accepted the evidence. It was so stupid. All they had to do was check my phone records that I submitted and compare it against the lie she told. Also, I didn't know it at the time, but there is a New York state law that says if a female ever calls 911 for a domestic issue, the male is automatically arrested and processed. She blatantly perjured herself, but the prosecutors didn't want to press charges. Moral of the story, don't stick your dick in crazy. You think you can control the situation, and when a crazy girl has venom towards you, you're fucked. My roommate also stole $20 out of my wallet when I was gone and put all of my paintings on the roof. Luckily, my neighbor took them down and kept them for me. Also, I had to line up a court-appointed time to pick up my stuff from the apartment, and she was 30 minutes late to the court-appointed time. So, a bunch of cops and I were just waiting with our thumbs up our asses, and the cops almost left. It was ridiculous, and she never showed up for one court date, yet didn't drop the charges. He wasn't quite my ex at the time, and this is more fucked up than crazy, but I digress. 5-year relationship, long distance. He in New York City, me in San Francisco. We had agreed to use December of 16 as our date to get together and talk about closing the distance. I'm from New York City, and the general plan was for me to return to New York City in the spring and summer of 17. One night, we got into a dumb fight. It was stupid, just a misunderstanding. But that night was the first time in 5 years he was sort of a jackass to me on text. The next day, I didn't hear from him for hours. When he finally spoke, he said he wanted to tell me something. He proceeded to gush to me for an hour about another guy he had met, that they had an incredible connection, talked all night, and made this amazing bond. He described their lovemaking in avid and exciting detail until I finally cut him off and told him I didn't want to hear it, and that this was extremely concerning as I was his boyfriend, not his best gal pal. He and I were open, but we had rules about it, i.e. it's just supposed to be emotional as physical. We got into an argument that night and ended up sort of breaking up, both of us confused and crying. We ended up taking a break for 2 weeks to just give ourselves some time and space to think things through. Yet, he kept breaking the break and would text me or email me how much he missed me or how sad he was that he didn't feel our bond anymore. It was an extremely upsetting and confusing period, made all the more aggravating by 3,000 miles and his general dislike of confrontation or emotional subjects. After 2 weeks of being on break, I decided that we needed to talk live. The 2 weeks for me made me realize how much I loved and cared for him, and that I really wanted to make this work. The dude he met lived in Canada, so I figured he wasn't much of a threat, but that it was my guy's first experience with a crush. I had 2 of them while we were together, and I just know how to separate myself from them. I took off work on 1-day notice for 3 days, booked a flight and a hotel for us to talk at, basically dropping close to $2,000. When I got there, the bond definitely felt broken. We both commented later that for 5 years, we could always feel each other when we were live. But this time, we both felt like strangers. He didn't want to talk about what happened. He kept saying, I don't want to talk about the relationship. Let's just rebuild the friendship first. And me saying, we aren't friends. We are partners. The second night I was there, I took him out to dinner to a nice steakhouse. I decided he was right, and we just needed a break from the relationship talk, and let's just talk like human beings. It was moderately better, but there was still this silent distance between us. I noticed he ordered way different than usual, and even took a few pictures during his meal. That night in the hotel, he fell asleep and his phone went off. There were texts from the new guy. I read the string, and they had been texting all night. My guy saying he was with a friend, and thanking the new guy for introducing him to oysters. I brought this up the next day, and it just got into another argument. Him indicating that the guy was just a good friend who happened to live in another country, and me indicating that I had just spent a ton of money and time to fly out here and try to make things work. But he couldn't give me an ounce of attention, and that this guy is clearly not just a friend. The last day I was there, we finally had a breakthrough. He admitted to some issues he had, and I admitted to some that I had. We started laughing and being ourselves again, and actually had a really nice breakfast and lunch together, like our old selves. We kissed before I got into the cab. He told me he loved me, and I said, I think we are going to be just fine. I love you so much. Let's go back to just taking a little break so I can focus on grad school, and I'll see you in 2 weeks for my birthday, and we will talk again, okay? I agreed, and thought it was the best solution, allowing me to refocus on my life that I had put on pause for a few weeks, with this completely distracting me. The next day, he sent me a nice email thanking me for coming down and reiterating that he was really glad we were able to get to common ground and feel our bond again, and saying that the 2-week break is to just give him a little time to focus on finishing grad school, and that we would be fine. He sent song lyrics that made me smile. 2 hours later, I got an email alert. It was for Amazon, notifying me that my package was being prepared for delivery. Confused, I checked and saw that my guy, a few minutes after emailing me, had ordered a gift for the new friend. He had forgotten that our Amazon account was shared. And the big kicker? I paid for the gift. It was a CD. Despite knowing it was a huge mistake to do, I ended up using the information to call the gentleman the next day. Maybe I'm the crazy ex? I didn't call to claim territory or act angry or possessive. I was actually really pleasant with him and just indicated I was confused and wanted to know what exactly was happening between he and my boyfriend. He said all the right things and was very polite about it. I'm so sorry. He said you guys were broken up. I can't imagine how hurt you must be. We both know you shouldn't have called me. It's your guy that you need to speak to. And finally, I don't want drama or to be the cause of pain between you guys. I'll back out. I called my guy and told him that me and Canada guy had spoken. I didn't do it in vindication or anger. I was actually sad and ashamed of myself that I had done this. My guy was actually fairly understanding and said he was sorry for everything and that he could understand why I had called him and acknowledged he had been treating me very badly. He asked if we could talk the next day. The next day, he emailed me and said he called the Canada guy right after we spoke to apologize on my behalf, and out of anger for me doing it. Decided to plan a visit up there after Thanksgiving as friends. We met twice more over his birthday week, and finally decided we just needed to go on a no-contact break and revisit things in January. I looked at his phone, and sure enough, he had been in contact with the guy the whole time. They are now together. How it's going to work with him being a U.S. citizen and the guy being a Canada one is beyond me. And have been together since the first week of December. I was finally told that my relationship was over 2 weeks ago, and not just on break. Sadly, he didn't know the rules of social media, and they have been posting pictures of their first vacation together in Mexico, with mutual friends sending me texts and screenshots to ask who the guy is, since they didn't know we had broken up. I think while not exactly crazy, this perhaps qualifies as sociopathically selfish, and he wasn't my ex during most of this. Oddly enough, I'm not really angry about it. I'm still mega hurt and shocked, but I know when stuff like this happens and when emotions take over, you can't really control them. I was just extremely disappointed in how he chose to handle it, and when I came back to New York City in a few weeks, I'm a bit curious to see how it will all pan out. My ex was, and still is, bipolar and refused treatment. It had been a slow descent into hell for years, but to be fair, I only got to grasp this after the divorce, and while I was still healing, we'd been married 7 years when she had me served at work, at my family business. Nice move. And due to her mental condition, which continued to deteriorate, the divorce took 18 months. We had no kids, a $75,000 house that was likely 3/4 of the way paid for. I can't recall the exact numbers. She had all kinds of weird stories in her head. I was cheating. Nope. And I was never home. Partly true. We were in debt up to our eyeballs, as she had over 10 jobs in 4 years, and the last 18 months had a negative income and a failed business that she borrowed money from her mother to start and never repaid the debt. The allegations were so fanciful that in the end, I was able to debunk 90% of them. There were tales of great wealth. Not. She attempted to go after my percentage ownership in the family business, which she could not do, as due to our debt, I never could invest money to buy more of my father's stakeout. If I'd paid $1 to him, it would have gotten 50% of the value of the company, which I later sold. I spent over $80,000 between my attorney and hiring a personal assistant to organize all of the files, far cheaper than my attorney's legal assistant. A year or so into the divorce, the allegations were getting so wacky that I finally hired a stenographer and had my wife deposed and was able to catch her up in all kinds of lies. She was fairly wacky at that point, and while I feel sorry for her by then, I was glad that she'd pushed me to the point of no return. By then, I'd uncovered all kinds of financial deceptions, one of which was criminal, as well as multiple cases of infidelity. I was done. We had a full day of mediation. I held my guns. She ended up accepting around $37,000. I paid $2,000 for her 2 cats. Technically hers, but she gladly sold them to me, as I was in fear of their well-being. A few weeks later, I was at the last meeting at her attorney's office, and she was 1.5 hours late. Her attorney was pissed, as she'd been doing this to him for 1.5 years. She'd been doing this to me for over 10, so I had no expectations otherwise. He started to vent about how she was going to try to screw his firm out of $30,000 she owed them. It seems they took the case on contingency, as her original story, which had completely unraveled, led them to believe that they were going to get 30% of a really large settlement. I listened to his venting and asked him that, being that she was late and that I was on the schedule, if I could make the check out to his law firm. He looked up at me and asked, "You would do that?" Now, keep in mind, I am in the process of divorcing this unstable woman and have spent a year and a half and over $80,000 at this point. Shit, yes, I'll write the check and let him deduct 100% of what she owes him. I wrote the check. She showed up 20 minutes later, not at all happy, but she is now someone else's problem. I've moved on, met an incredible woman, sold the company, have built a great career, and we are doing very well. My ex, she's still alive. I lost that bet. Remarried and appears to have found some happiness, which I am happy for, I guess. I loved this woman and did not want to get divorced. Her crazy act forced that issue, and I will be forever grateful for it. I used to keep my computer desk in the garage. It was just before smartphones hit, and this was my way of limiting my time on the internet. It was a crazy love relationship. I loved her, she was crazy. I finally had enough and bravely moved on. She, however, wasn't ready or willing to do the same. She was obsessive and would call or text 20 to 40 times an hour. From one voicemail to the next, she'd go from, "I just miss our friendship and want to talk," to, "I fucking hate you, you're evil, I hope you fucking die." And she'd cycle back again. Feeling badly about her having no friends or family in the faraway area I'd moved to, which she moved to as well. Yes, creepy, but not her worst act of pure creep. So I'd usually respond to her before bed, while I sat down at that desk answering emails, surfing Facebook, etc. Her calls and texts would increase whenever I interacted with females on social media. It was uncanny. I couldn't explain it. Then her texts would be very specific. "Who the fuck is Shannon? She looks like a whore." And I'm, at that moment, commenting on my friend Shannon's post. I was new to Facebook and inexperienced with the net. Internet was forbidden throughout our relationship, and I had no idea how my ex knew everything I was doing. Were one of those profiles actually her? Were several of them actually her? Were all of them actually her? She knew everything I was doing in real time. Then I felt she had somehow hacked into my computer because she knew about every bit of my email content, the songs I was listening to, literally everything. It was so out of hand that I just stopped using my computer. Yet, she still knew what I was doing in the garage. Playing guitar, hanging with my dog, fixing a bike. She knew it all. So, I turned on the computer and opened a new email draft and simply wrote, "I know you're watching everything I'm doing. This is stalking. You need help." And I sat and waited. Sure enough, texts start coming in, fast and furious. She's not a stalker. I won't let her into my life, so she'll get the information any way she can, blah, blah, blah. I never sent that email to anyone. It just stood there written out. I realized she was watching me. I left the garage, went out the front door, heard some rustling by the truck, and the slapping sound of feet hitting the pavement as someone ran away. I lived in a high-crime area, and there was no sense calling the police for a nonviolent issue that was already over. The next morning, I went out to the truck and saw distinct footprints on the hood of my truck, and I saw various facial smudges on the window pane in the garage door. The top of the door had several panes for lighting, but they were too high for anyone to look through. She had been standing on the truck watching me through the window every night, even though I never did anything weird or embarrassing on the internet. It was such a gross, creepy feeling to know that she watched me like a favorite TV show every single freaking night. I moved away. I changed my number, which she, several times, somehow got her hands on. But she didn't know where I had moved to because no one but my family knew. I'm still completely creeped out by it, and it was several years ago. My ex had overheard a buddy and I talking about a possible future hunt just before Thanksgiving. Planned to be home the night before the holidays. She came walking in with our 2-year-old daughter in her arms. Rather than talking over the possible plan, she began yelling at the top of her lungs, setting our daughter on edge. Immediately. When I requested we talk the issue over after our daughter's bedtime, my ex snatched a hammer off the top of my glass front gun case, threatening to break the glass. Our daughter pleaded, "Mommy, no, no." Once again, I requested she stop this behavior until an appropriate time. For just a moment, it seemed Mommy was going to settle down and do the right thing. As I reached out to take the weapon, the hammer, my ex suddenly swung and shattered the glass out of a tall door panel in the case. Our daughter shrieked in panic. Her back was turned to the noise, so it was very startling. As our daughter swung her head around to see what was violently happening, my ex smashed the glass out of the opposite door panel. This time, the glass didn't fall inward. Some of the shards were deflected out onto our daughter and my ex. My ex was actually protected from the glass. Our daughter suffered a cut 1/4 of an inch deep from right outside of the corner of her eye. The cut, being a facial wound, bled suddenly and profusely for a few moments. We had to take my daughter to a pediatrician immediately for evaluation. Thank God the wound didn't require stitching. The doctor said, had the shard hit the center of the eye, our daughter most certainly would have had lost a substantial amount of vision. For almost 2 weeks, whenever her mommy tried to reach out to pick her up, our daughter would run screaming to me. My daughter's personality changed that very day. She became so fragile in personality. She didn't really want to be alone with her mom, and this undecidedness manifested into trust issues and eventually a hatred for any girl or woman who lost control and began yelling. Eventually, our daughter grew to hate her mother's yelling fits, resulting in a nearly permanent separation. My ex kicked her out at age 15. I spent a great deal of time with my daughter, even though my ex and I went our separate ways. I gladly moved my daughter in with me, and have always had an open door when she needs me. So that you can understand, this is a pretty long entry. So hold on to your butts because this one is a pretty wild ride. First, let me start you off with a bit of context. I am a female, and I live in the Pacific Northwest. At the time this happened, I was 20 years old. It all started at an anime convention. It's here I was cosplaying as Hatsune Miku from the Vocaloid series. The first day there was pretty fun, and I met a lot of pretty cool people. Now, we fast forward to the second day. This day consisted of attending various workshops and performing in live karaoke sessions. During the live karaoke session, I met this guy who was cosplaying as Edward Elric from Full Metal Alchemist. In this story, I'll refer to him as Alan. He seemed pretty cool, and we started talking for a bit. After the live karaoke, we ended up getting dinner together at a nearby Denny's. It's here we talked about our favorite hobbies, what we did, etc. Now, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't love at first sight. And wouldn't you know it, before the night ended, we exchanged phone numbers and then went our separate ways. The next day was day 3 of the convention, but instead of attending, Alan and I decided to go on a date and check out the surrounding city. Again, we ended up getting along quite famously, and before the sunset, Alan had a question for me. I'm sure you know where this one's going. We have so many things in common, he says. I know this is all of a sudden, but I'll regret it if I don't say anything right now. Would you like to be boyfriend and girlfriend? I was taken aback, and at first I was going to say no. After all, I had only just met him. But being dumb and naive, I said yes and agreed. This would turn out to be one of the worst decisions of my entire life, so far, to that point. Fast forward a couple of days, and Alan had returned home to Texas. We were now talking almost exclusively on the cell phone, and I found myself in my room just texting him and playing video games together on PlayStation. This would continue into the upcoming months. However, little things in Alan's behavior started to hint that something was seriously spoiling. On top of the usual I love you messages, he would go on about how he wouldn't know what he would do if I ever broke up with him. I would always reassure him that that was never going to happen, but that didn't stop him from saying things like he would end it all if I ever left him. Really weird, but to combat this, I visited him, and he did the same thing. This back and forth continued for almost 2 years, until one point, I found out he was seeing someone else. I won't get into the details of how I found out, since that's a whole other story on its own. But the point was, I was beyond devastated. I invested all this time with someone who was going through such a hard time in his life, only for him to do this to me. I ended up breaking up with Alan a few days after I found out he was cheating on me. Alan then goes on to say it was a mistake and that he was sorry, but I wasn't having it. That should have been the end of the story. However, this was just the second act of my living nightmare. About a week passed since the breakup, and the phone calls began. I'm not exaggerating when I say I got off work one late night and had easily over 50 missed calls and at least 30 text messages from Alan. The messages started off fairly innocent, but then they went into more graphic details. Some of the messages described how he wanted me to meet my death and demise. I hope one day they find you at the bottom of a lake, because I'm sure no one is going to find you or even miss you too. The messages were a bit more graphic than that. Anyway, I ended up blocking him, but I know what you're most likely wondering. Did he leave any voicemails? Well, sure he did. There were 3. The first 2 were just him crying, but the third one sent chills down my spine. You don't love me anymore, do you? I don't get it. How long do I have to cry before you'll take me back? That's it. I'm done with you. You'll regret everything you've put me through. I'll personally make sure of it." There were a few little things after that, such as him creating new accounts on social media just to leave nasty comments on my photos and posts. Thankfully, I was able to fix this by setting all of my accounts to private. Only then, one day, things got way too real. One weekend, my parents were out of town, and I was in charge of looking after the house. I was returning from a friend's house, and that's when I noticed the front door was wide open. Now, I'm the kind of person who gets really paranoid when it comes to open doors and windows. Before leaving the house, I always double check and even triple check to make sure everything is locked. That's why I found this activity quite strange. So, instead of entering the house, I got on the phone with the police and told them that there might be a possible intruder. I waited in the car until 2 officers showed up 10 minutes later. They did a complete search of my home, and what they found in my room was creepy as all hell. Alan was hiding underneath my bed, and he had one of my kitchen knives. In summary, the officers ended up arresting him and taking him into custody. He later confessed he broke in and was waiting for me to go to bed. Once I was in dreamland, he would crawl out from under my bed and, well, with a knife in hand, stab me to death. After this, he went to court, and not only did I get a restraining order on him, but he also got time behind bars. It's been about a year since he was arrested, and I have now moved on with my own life and live 2 hours away with my new partner. Though I've tried to move on from him, I can't help but get paranoid anytime I'm by myself. This creepy event happened in 2017. My fiance and I, now happily married by the way, lived in the same apartment in downtown San Jose, California. We, being the responsible young adults we were, worked full-time jobs and had different schedules. This meant that we rarely were together, as he worked during the night as a security guard, and I worked during the day at a grocery store. As a side note, I was walking back to the apartment this week because my car was in the shop. My fiance was using our other vehicle for his work. Anyway, one day I got off work later than usual and began to walk back at around 1 p.m. Before reaching the house, I wanted to bring back some soup because my fiance said he was sick, and I thought I would surprise him with a nice warm meal. So I made a 10-minute detour and went to the restaurant to pick him up some soup. While I was waiting for the order, I couldn't help but notice a woman, I'd say in her early 30s, staring at me. It would have been normal if it weren't for the fact that she looked very familiar, but I couldn't place where I had seen her. This awkward staring lasted for about 5 minutes, until I got up and left. Whatever, just some random lady, seemingly out of it. Halfway home, I passed an alleyway and noticed a figure approaching me. They ended up calling out, and I made the dumb mistake of stopping in place. It was the same lady from before. Now, I finally realized who I was looking at and where I recognized her from. This was the ex-girlfriend of my fiance, and the only reason I knew how she looked was that my fiance had shown me pictures of her. But the thing is, what did she want with me? Revenge. I'll tell you. She went on to say how I stole the love of her life, and that I would be sorry for the misery that she's been going through. I basically told her that any and all business regarding their past was just that, the past. But she wasn't having any of it. She began to curse at me, and I got to stepping. She ended up following me until I arrived at the apartment. This was a big mistake, as she now knew where I lived. Luckily, you need a keycard to enter the building. which meant that as soon as I entered, she was forced to wait outside. I could take a sigh of relief. That relief, however, would change when I saw she took out a switchblade and began pounding and punching at the door. She hit it so hard you could actually see blood on her knuckles through the glass. Needless to say, I booked it to the second story, locked myself in, and called my fiancé. I couldn't believe what he told me. It turned out that one of his ex-girlfriends had messaged him saying she was following his new girlfriend, which was me, and was going out of her way to ensure I was never heard from again. You guessed it, the same one who had been following me. We called the police, but nothing ever came of it, as we never, ever saw her again. As it so happened, she was arrested for assault and battery charges, but that was because of something completely different. She's behind bars now, and I'm glad we never have to see her ever again. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these Psycho X stories. I would like to take a moment and thank the rest of the members of Back to Ashes and the new listeners. Thank you all so much for your continuous support. For without you, I would not have a voice and this channel would not exist. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.